Thomas, it's such an honor to have you on the Noise to Signal podcast, or as the world knows you as Halvar Flake. This is the first episode of season 2. I'm curious, how did Thomas become Halvar Flake?
I had been on vacation about a year earlier and I had long hair, was a bit rowdy. The kids had called me Halvar because there's a cartoon character from a village called Flake and used that as a nickname.
What was the motivation for you to get into work like copy production or breaking copy production?
There was a computer in the house. My brother was very smitten with computers. And I asked him, hey, bigger brother, how do I remove a copy protection? And he said, oh, it's really easy.
You are known as a legendary shellcoder. How did that version of Thomas become this legendary reverse engineer?
It's important to remember that a lot of the names that you see today in security come from the cracking scene. The cracking scene people were very comfortable writing assembly.
Thomas, one of your greatest contributions is your creation of BinDiff. What was your thinking behind writing BinDiff?
A Polish hacking group called LSD had found a whole bunch of issues in Microsoft's DCOM implementation, which allowed essentially remote compromise to any Windows machine on the internet. Microsoft's release binaries were shipped with profiling-guided optimization. So we needed some way of doing the comparison that was resilient against compiler optimization changes.
Who were the types of people you ran into who wanted to buy BinDiff?
There were lots of military and intelligence people in the English-speaking world that were quite interested.
The kind of work that you were doing and the software was enabling, did you see any pushback?
I mean, first of all, Microsoft was very much not amused. Like at some point, somebody called the office and was like, "Oh, we really want to buy your software, but we need to pay in cash." At some point, we got an order from the People's Liberation Army, like the Chinese military, for a large license of BinDiff.
Were you bootstrapped until this point?
Yeah, no, the entire company was bootstrapped. There were other funny situations, like around the Stuxnet time, we got somebody calling up, "Oh, we need a reverse engineering trainings, and price doesn't matter. Like charge whatever you want."
You ended up selling the company to Google.
The important thing to remember is that selling reverse engineering tools back then was a terrible business. It was a young and exciting and idealistic company with lots of compute. So we're like, okay, Google is a good choice. Like, we'd rather sell to Google for price X than to Symantec for like 2X. Yeah, and then it was a very painful, very drawn-out negotiation process with Google.
Why was it painful?
Like the law firm they had hired was begging us to tell Google to please come to their senses.
What's the future of reverse engineering? What's the future of cyber offense?
I did not foresee the level of agentic autonomy we have now. Reverse engineering was always an endurance task. And I expect the models to continue getting better in almost all realms where you have verifiable rewards. The offensive people will have access to the most powerful LLMs to find bugs to exploit. There is some equilibrium that will be reached. Where the equilibrium will land in terms of how many bugs there are, how difficult they are to find, well, we shall see. Right? It's a brave new world in some sense.
I want to get your thoughts on advice for young entrepreneurs and young researchers on how to think about this world that is coming our way in the next 4 to 5 years.
So in some sense, security is exciting again because something has moved for the first time in more than a decade. I don't think I've been as interested in the changes in tech as I am now in a while. People look at LLMs and are like, oh no, we're obsolete as software engineers or something like this. I think that's the wrong lens to look at this. We're a long way away from complete obsolescence of the human input. I think a human with a tool will outperform just the tool for the foreseeable future. So try to be that human with a tool.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Thomas Dullien, aka Halvar Flake, computing mathematician, vulnerability researcher, and the creator of BinDiff.
Thomas, it's such an honor to have you on the Noise to Signal podcast, or as the world knows you as Halvar Flake. You know, the thing that I find most interesting about you is that you are a trained mathematician, you're a trained computer scientist, but in this odd way, you find yourself in the world of vulnerability research, reverse engineering, cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to, first of all, thank you for coming on the podcast. I don't know if you know this is the first episode of season 2, so super honored to have you on this episode. I wanted to start the interview in terms of your origins into this space. You're popularly known as Halvar Flake. I'm curious, how did Thomas become Halvar Flake?
Yeah, so when I started doing computer stuff, this was the very early days when there were still BBS and like computers you would dial into from your machine that you could then leave messages on for others. And once a day that BBS might or might not connect to the internet to send news through contents and so forth. It was there that I chose my first nickname. Then a little bit later on, I decided I want to start doing copy protection removal. And in order to learn copy protection removal cracking, I had to join IRC. Now, at this point in time, the internet has arrived, and you need to pick a nickname. And I had been on vacation about a year earlier, and I had long hair, was a bit rowdy. I've always been not the slimmest of people. And the other kids had called me Halvar because there's a cartoon character, like a small Viking boy called Vicky from a village called Flake, and his dad is a rather fat, rowdy Viking by the name of Halvar. And I decided that Halvar is a good nick as any and used that as a nickname. And then it stuck. I used that nickname while I was in the cracking scene doing copy protection removal.
But then what happened to the Flake? How did the Flake come along? So the
I mean,
Halvar
it was the village that Vicky comes from is called Flake, Flake, Flake. And oftentimes when you entered your name somewhere, you had to have a last name. So I used Flake for it. This all happened while I was in the US with a high school exchange in Minnesota, of all places, in a host family that had Norwegian ancestry, where the host grandfather was still mainly speaking Norwegian. So my English had acquired a Norwegian accent on top of it.
Interesting.
Which made the nickname, which sounds vaguely Norwegian, made the nickname very plausible, right? Blonde person with a Norwegian accent, slightly Norwegian sounding name.
I'm curious, do you have Viking and, ancestry? Like, are you like a descendant of the Vikings in some sort, or is it not relevant?
I mean, it's hard to tell, right? There was a lot of, if you realize what the Vikings did, there was a lot of looting and pillaging at the time. Both my father's and my mother's family come from the Baltic Sea coast, which is now approximately Lithuania, or a Russian enclave in Lithuania called Kaliningrad, which was ethnic German at the time. But clearly it's close to the coast, and it's close to where all the Vikings used to raid. So who knows?
It's plausible. It is plausible that there is some Viking ancestry in Halvar Flake. I'm curious, I assume you were a teenager at this point. You're getting you're just getting on the cracking scene. What was the motivation for you to get into, the kind of work like copy protection or breaking copy protection, doing that kind of work? You're probably very young and not have a good sense of the world, what's going on in the world and whatnot. I'm curious, what was driving you at that point?
So it's important to know I've got a brother that is 6 years older than me, and he was always a bit of the nerd in the family. When he was 8 or 9, he bought himself like a home computer assembly kit, like a TI-1, I think. I don't recall the exact model, but one of these computers with like 16 kilobytes of RAM and a data set, like a cassette tape that you can save data on. And my dad, who had not had a very successful career up till shortly after I was born, who was a trained lawyer of all things, saw a newspaper ad from a company that decided that hiring people that don't know how to program, but they know something about business and accounting, and teaching them how to program is easier than to teach a programmer about business and accounting. So he called that number, and in his 40s, he started programming. So there was a computer in the house. My brother was very smitten with computers, and I was 6 years younger, and the niche of being good at computers was already occupied by my brother. So I just played games. Like I would try to write down the listings from the Happy Computer magazine. Like there was a German print magazine that you would buy, and it would have basic listings for computer games. So you could just type them off and then hopefully run them, provided you had made no mistake in typing them off. So yeah, I only played games, and then you run into copy protections naturally. And my brother might have been 14, 15, so he knew how to remove them. And I might have been 8 or 9. And I asked him, hey, bigger brother, how do I remove a copy protection? And he said, oh, it's really easy. You just find and invert a jump. And I didn't know what a jump was or anything like it. So for the next couple of years, the only thing I knew about copy protections was I need to learn assembly and I need to find an inverted jump. So I mostly focused on creative pursuits like drawing, 3D animation, whatever you could do at the time. And I ran into copy protection issues all the time because all the shareware software had limits and you could never do much. And then I went to a high school exchange in the US, and this was rural Minnesota, like an hour south of Fargo, in a tiny village. And the big event on the weekends was you would drive up to Fargo and you would go to a Barnes & Noble's bookstore. And in that Barnes & Noble's bookstore, they had a book that was called Masterclass Assembly Language by a company called Rox Press at the time. And it was written by a bunch of Russians that actually did reverse engineering as well. It was a very good book. I could walk you through step by step through setting up a DPMI extender, moving the CPU into protected mode, essentially writing a small mini operating system. And it had an explicit chapter on reverse engineering even. So I went through that book, and I think that book was the best investment I've ever made. And a couple of weeks later, I managed to crack my first copy protection, which was a terrifying butcher job, inverting jumps all over the place until it worked, but it worked.
And what software was that?
It was a Quake 3D model editor, because I had made Quake animations like a hopping rabbit and a few other things. And because I was really into animation at the time, my desired career was in character animation, either 2D or 3D. So yeah, I cracked that software. And then through cracking that software, I found the cracking groups online. There was an IRC channel at the time called Cracking for Newbies, which was very inviting and in some sense became like, there's surprisingly many people in security nowadays that went through Cracking for Newbies at some point. I mean, Rolf Rolls works for Hexrace these days as, I think, their chief scientist. And I met Rolf for the first time in Cracking for Newbies. So it was an IRC channel where people congregated to learn cracking. And then once they were any good at cracking, there were the Wares release groups. So you would join either a cracking group or a Wares group and start cracking for them. And there was a sort of competition amongst them about who could crack the most and the quickest. There was at some point a group called Core, which automated a lot of that stuff. And they had like a few Chinese crackers. One of them was called Zyrex, which just had a phenomenal output in terms of hundreds of key generators a month. Key generators were the upper tier of what you could do reputation-wise, because you wouldn't modify the program. You would figure out how the licensing key scheme works, break it and invert it, and then would just generate valid license keys.
So,
yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense that you're a teenager, you're playing games, the games are probably restricted. You use copy protection to unlock these games so you can continue to play the games, do the animation. The thing that is not clear to me is you are known as a legendary shellcoder. Like your shellcodes are legendary. The thing it's not clear to me is how did that version of Thomas become this legendary hacker and reverse engineer and creator of these super small shellcodes? Like, what was that journey like? How did that happen?
So it's important to remember that a lot of the names that you see today in security come from the cracking scene and pretty much all crossed over at about the same time. Stefan Esser, cracking scene alumni. Solar Designer, cracking scene alumni. Anders Foch works like a distinguished or engineer, like a highest level of engineering at Intel, former cracking scene. There was a point in time, like the cracking scene people were very comfortable writing assembly. The hacking scene people were usually not so comfortable writing assembly. So what happened is that hacking scene people reached out to cracking scene people to help them with shellcode writing. And then the cracking scene people were like, oh, this is easy. Wow, let's do it. Like, even, funnily enough, the Grug had his origins in the same field, like in the same general youth culture. So there was literally a moment in time where several different hacking groups had an influx of the same group of teenagers, essentially. Like there was a hacking group called Teso, there was a hacking group called ADM. There were a bunch of different hacking groups, and what happened is essentially a large group of the cracking scene split off from the cracking scene and started doing hacking. And if you're very used to writing a lot of stuff in assembly and reading assembly all day, then shellcoding is actually very easy. So that's how, even as a mediocre assembly person from the cracking scene, you would get a reputation as being a wizard at assembly in the hacking scene, just because the bar was at a very different level.
Yeah. The bar was so low in the hacking scene, an average cracking scene guy would become like the elite.
Kind of like that. Like at least the low level assembly stuff was pretty easy.
And Thomas, one of the greatest contributions that you've done is your creation of BinDiff. That was, when it came out, it was a revolutionary product in the sense that you could easily figure out where the changes were made by the vendors in terms of the patches that they were pushing. The way I remember this is, well, Microsoft would push out these patches and not explain what they fixed.
Yeah,
and very difficult. It was very difficult to figure out what was patched. And if you looked at the assembly code, or if you looked it up in IDE Pro, it was very cumbersome, if I remember it correctly. And then BinDiff comes along, and it completely revolutionized the game in terms of finding what changes were made and so on. So I'm curious, what was your thinking behind writing BinDiff? Was it like a side project that morphed into something big?
Yeah, I mean, I had just begun studying mathematics, or was perhaps a year. So I graduated from high school in 2000, had to do my military replacement service. So I started studying in late 2001. And I think the relevant bug disclosure that triggered me to work on BinDiff was at some point in 2002. I don't remember the specifics too well. But in essence, a Polish hacking group called LSD had found a whole bunch of issues in Microsoft's DCOM implementation, which allowed essentially remote compromise to any Windows machine on the internet at the time, because that stuff was open to the world. And Microsoft wouldn't provide any details about what they changed. And that was very frustrating for me, because I wanted to know the bug, clearly, right? So another complicating factor was that Microsoft's release binaries were shipped with profiling guided optimization. So they had the hot code paths all at the beginning of the code, of the executable. And then all the error paths had been moved to the end of the executable to improve caching and memory footprint and so forth. But when they issued patches, they didn't run them through the same profiling guided optimizer. So the binary layout would be dramatically different, because now all the functions in the patched version would be in one place. Whereas in the original release version, they would be split into the hot path and the non-hot path, which made, byte-based comparison was infeasible by the rearrangement, but also by different compiler optimization settings. So we needed some way of doing the comparison that was resilient against compiler optimization changes and this profiling guided optimization. And what do you do when you're studying mathematics and they try to beat into your head to always look at the structure of everything? You're like, oh, well, there's a graph structure here. Let's see what we can do with the graph structure. And yeah, that's where the idea came from. And then a prototype was written. The idea of using the graphs was in the air at the time. There was another researcher at BindView that had a similar idea and posted a similar prototype at some point. And turns out that BinDiff solved a real problem for many people. And then people wanted to buy the software. And I didn't mind selling it, but they minded buying it from a student. Like, they wanted source code escrow and all sorts of things. I was like, hey, if I had a legal entity, nobody would ask me these questions. So I, during my undergrad, essentially went and set up a company in Germany so I could sell the tool. And like I was, when I went to, like, left home and went to college, I had decided that I, like, for a variety of personal reasons, that I would prefer not to take any money from my parents, just to earn my money by myself. Families are complicated at the best of times. So selling BinDiff, like, I would finance my studies by doing trainings, like essentially reverse engineering trainings. And selling BinDiff allowed me to do fewer of these trainings and spend more time actually at home doing some studies. And yeah.
I'm curious, who were your customers? Like, who was interested in this in those days? Like, who cared about this much that they would pay money for it? Because this was like very early. This is like, very early stages of the internet, right?
It's
not like, what it is today.
2003, 2004 timeframe. So we're already well into the internet.
No, but the internet was more around the commerce, not like the hacking, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, who was so interested in this reverse, the hacking scene, and
Well,
who were the types of people you ran into who wanted to buy BinDiff?
there were lots, like it fell into different buckets. There were lots of military and intelligence people in the English-speaking world that were quite interested. There were a few intelligence services and military folks in the Scandinavian realm that were interested.
And the motivation was to do the kind of work that you were doing, is to figure out where the patches were, figure out the exploits for them. Was like, hey, was that the motivation for them or something else?
I mean, the tool itself turned out to be useful in a variety of situations. You had the clear offensive use where you could just try to patch cap, like take the patch, turn it around into an exploit quickly, use it before it gets patched. So there was some customers that were doing that. There were other customers like there's a company called, there used to be a company called Determina that would do essentially intrusion prevention by understanding the patches and then writing detections for the attack in the patches. So some of our customers were on the defensive side trying to write detection for the bugs. Some of the customers were interested in porting information from existing disassemblies to a new version of the same software. So if you've already disassembled one thing and you want to not lose all your work so that when the next version comes out, BinDiff was very helpful with that. Some people wanted to compare malware variants. So when you have a complicated piece of malware, you want to compare them. Some people were car tuners. Like we had multiple car chip tuning customers, which surprised me quite a bit. In essence, we had a very, very random assortment of very interesting customers that very often couldn't talk to us.
I'm curious, given the kind of work that you were doing and the software was enabling, did you see any pushback from the government agencies? Hey, you should not sell it to these people, or you should not sell it to those people because they could use this. Like the same narrative that we see it with today with Fable and all these, latest technologies that are out there. So did you sense that when you're trying to sell BinDiff at all?
Yeah, I mean, BinDiff, first of all, Microsoft was very much not amused, right? And I learned later that there were discussions inside Microsoft at the time how to best crush us.
Really?
And like not official discussions, but people talked about these things, right? In the end, we're quite thankful that they didn't. But yeah, I mean, clearly we try to introduce a sort of know your customer program. So the secretary/admin would have to try to vet every customer, which is kind of difficult sometimes because sometimes you had sketchy customers, like some random person in Virginia that sets up a fake custom, like a fake thing.
Or
you had or you had people in, like at some point somebody called the office and it's like, oh, we really want to buy your software, but we need to pay in cash. Can we drop by the office and pay in cash? And it's these situations where you have to just try to force everybody into good behavior and be reasonable about who you sell to. At some point, most of our income was coming from the English-speaking world, and I was at a conference, and then somebody who was working for the US government at the time was telling me, well, we can't tell you whom to sell to or whom to not sell to, but just be aware, your selling decisions impact our buying decisions. And I was like, that's 60% of our 70% of our revenue. Can you tell me who I can't sell to? And they're like, no. All right. Can you provide an oracle that if I'm doubtful on whether I can sell, I can ask somebody that can tell me yes or no? And I'm like, no. So, and at that point, you just try to do your best, knowing that you will eventually fail, right? One example is at some point we got an order from the People's Liberation Army, like the Chinese military, for a large license of BinDiff. And then we decided, well, we can't sell to you for reasons. And then a couple of weeks later, we get an order from a Canadian company called Hong Bin Im Export. Same order. And we're like, yeah, no, can't do that either. And a couple of weeks later, we get an order from a Chinese origin architecture student in Sydney, like an individual person trying to order like an enterprise license. And we're all, again, no. But you've got to be realistic. If somebody wants your software,
they'll get it.
They like a nation state can put in a lot of effort. And as a small company, you will not be able to prevent a determined nation state from getting the software, at least.
I'm curious, Were you bootstrapped until this point?
Yeah.
Like
No, the entire company was bootstrapped. There were other funny situations, like around the Stuxnet time, we got somebody calling us and like, oh, we need a reverse engineering trainings, and price doesn't matter. Like charge whatever you want, but it has to be either in Turkey or in Malaysia. And we're like, that's a strange request. And then we figured out that Turkey and Malaysia were one of the, like, were the two countries where Iranians could travel without a visa. And at that point, we again had to cancel. And the company also did reverse engineering trainings in Frankfurt on site, which was often funny because people, like all our diverse set of strange customers would congregate there and eye each other suspiciously.
And why Frankfurt? Is like Frankfurt has this special visa situation?
No. We were just based in Bochum, and Frankfurt was the international airport that was easiest to reach for everybody. But the part is that at some point post Stuxnet, we got essentially no signups outside of Iranian people. And at that point, we're like, listen, we have to cancel these trainings. We can't do it.
And were these done by you, or do you had like a team of people? Like these were these trainings like were they specifically, we want Thomas on the training team kind of a request, or was that like anybody from your company could train?
Not anybody could train. I did most of the trainings, but we also had a few trainings where I was not present. So it depended on the situation, it depended on the subject, it depended on what had to be done. Most of the time, I was pretty instrumental in running the trainings.
And then you ended up selling the company to Google.
Yeah.
Curious what happened there. Like, so, you're doing well, you're doing your trainings, you're like the talk of the town in all the elite Intel circles. Like everyone wants a piece of BinDiff and wants to buy your software. What happens next? Like how did the Google acquisition happen?
So the important thing to remember is that selling reverse engineering tools back then was a terrible business. Like
I think it is still a terrible business, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell. I haven't tried again because I think I learned from my mistakes. But I mean, when I tried at one point to do a business plan to invite investment or to get investment, I realized that the business plan is essentially we're going to solve a bunch of really hard computer science problems, and we're going to sell it to like 120 people for $800 a pop. And that's just a terrible business model. That's like, I'm going to do handcrafted pianos for one-armed ballerinas. It's like just not a viable business plan. And Zynamics largely survived by virtue of the fact that German salaries were reasonably low, even for competent people. So we could pay relatively low, like by today's standards, low salaries. We all liked what we're doing, but also it required an enormous effort, an enormous investment of energy from everybody, because the underlying business was actually not a good business. So over time, you exhaust yourself running that business. I ended up having all sorts of health problems and so forth, and it became clear to me that something's got to give. And Aurora, my business partner at the time, and we then started discussing, okay, this is not sustainable the way it's running. We need to find a good path out. And so one of the things we had a product called the X-Stars, which was very good at malware classification. And we tried to sell it to antivirus companies at the time, not realizing that the antivirus companies at the time were no longer capable of innovating. And then at some point after, like, our product was good, but we should have not tried to sell it to the antivirus companies. We should have tried to set up a separate antivirus company that competes. Because in some sense, if you look at what CrowdStrike did, is CrowdStrike, instead of trying to sell something to the AV companies, just decided we're going to eat those dinosaurs, and successfully did so. So yeah, ran low on energy. We were thinking about who could we reasonably sell to without screwing everything up. And then we got very lucky that Google got hacked by the Chinese government just at the right time, because about a year before, they were not very interested in what we're doing. And then Aurora happens, and out of a sudden, they're very interested in what we're doing. And me and Aurora at the time discussed, well, exiting this is early Google as well. This is Google at 10,000 employees, which is not comparable to the behemoth it is today. And it was a young and exciting and idealistic company with lots of compute. So we're like, okay, Google is a good choice. Like, we'd rather sell to Google for price X than to Symantec for like 2X, because we'll hate our lives for the next couple of years.
Correct.
Yeah, and then it was a very painful, very drawn out negotiation process with Google, because we were not a typical...
Why was it painful? What happened there?
So we were not the typical acquisition target. Like Google was very well set up to buy a typical VC-funded Silicon Valley company. They really were not well set up to buy a small engineering-centric company in Germany in a foreign jurisdiction with everything that entailed. So the negotiations were difficult. They're always difficult in M&A. They're doubly difficult if it's your first negotiation, like your first rodeo. Because in some sense, as a founder, you're stepping into a ring with a professional boxer, right? Because the other negotiator does nothing but screw people over all day. That's their job. And you're just I was very inexperienced. And and then there were complications where Google had the process to do something, as they do. And that process is largely the same for buying Motorola and buying Zynamics. Like it scales up arbitrarily, scales down very poorly. And one of the special parts of the German legal system is that if you sell a company, you have to go in front of a notary and the entire acquisition contract has to be read out to both parties in full to make sure they both understand what they're getting into. But Google's legal department insisted that they have to take the American, the acquisition contract they use in the US for under American law and so forth, which is hundreds of pages, and insisted on making that work under German law. And Google's German law firm, the law firm they had hired, was begging us to tell Google to please come to their senses and not force them to translate hundreds of pages of contract into a different legal system. And we're like, we can't tell them what to do. So anyhow, the day of the sale, I spent 8.5 hours having a notary read hundreds of pages of a US contract to me.
So the painful process was the legalities, not like the pricing discussion, the valuation. That was
all of
that, or was that all adding to the mix into it?
Yeah, I mean, all of that is painful. It's particularly painful the first time you do it. It gets easier as time goes by, but that was very painful. I'm not going to lie.
How was the experience post-acquisition? I remember you were part of the Project Zero.
Yeah. No, we were not part of Project Zero. Project Zero didn't exist when we got acquired. That was a much later development. We joined a trio of teams that was trying to protect Google from government attacks. And I have to admit, I have to say that as painful as the negotiations were, the actual, I was very, very happy the day I signed. I felt it is a great outcome for the team, great outcome for the technology. I think we were, overall, it was a very happy, as far as acquisitions go, it was one of the happiest acquisitions I know of. Most of, everybody came along to join Google pretty much with the exception of the admin. And pretty much most of them stayed at Google for a very long time thereafter. There's still a couple of Zynamics people at Google now.
And did you move to the Google headquarters, or did you continue to operate from Frankfurt?
We all moved. We were not based in Frankfurt. We were based further north, but we all moved to Zurich, which is in Switzerland. So, but that was also helpful that you're moving into a city where the language that's spoken is at least pretty similar. Swiss German isn't quite German, but it's related enough that picking it up is possible.
But then did you have a role in whenever the Project Zero got incubated? Were you part of that team? Did you contribute to that team, or was there nothing to do with it?
I wouldn't say nothing to do with it. I was watching it from a couple yards afar, and I was in favor of it being created, but I wasn't part of it. I joined, I spent 4.5 years integrating the Zynamics technology into Google. Then I went on sabbatical, and when I returned into a role at Project Zero. But Project Zero had been formed by then and established and was an existing team.
Okay. Thomas, one of the things you mentioned earlier in the interview is one of the motivations for you was this compute, the compute that you would get access to if you get to Google. And I want to bring this discussion to the current day, because compute is the most scarcest resource of today. If you have the compute and you have somebody like Thomas, like a very elite researcher, reverse engineer, and so on, what happens to this field of yours with elite talent and infinite compute? What's the future of reverse engineering? What's the future of cyber offense with this level of compute? Because now the compute is almost 1,000,000x than what you probably saw at those times, right? Given all the GPUs and all the technology that is out there. I'm curious, so, what is the future of AI native offense? with this level of?
Yeah, I mean, I have to caveat everything I'm saying now because my predictions about what would happen on what timeline have been wrong a couple times in recent years.
What was the first prediction that you made that was wrong?
So when I saw LLMs work for the first time, I did not anticipate that these could be turned into problem-solving engines. Like I did understand, hey, this is really useful, for example, to get a textual explanation for a piece of code.
Yep.
Because I mean, I had observed the sudden improvement in machine translation with the introduction of the transformer. And as long as I could imagine the issue at hand as a translation task, it was within my modeling that this would be feasible. So for example, a simple C function. Can you explain this function in human language for me? I was like, okay, perhaps that'll work. I can see that working. Or I write a human language description of a function in some detail, and then it translates it into code. Yeah, I could see that. I did not foresee the level of agentic autonomy we have now. I did not foresee the level of problem solving and reasoning ability we have now. My brother and me had a conversation about this recently because we seem to be very different in the way that we think about things, because I'm very much a shape rotator. Like I think very geometrically about almost everything. And very often it's very hard for me to move the geometric intuition that I've got into words. So I've got an image in my mind, and then translating that back into writing was also my biggest difficulty studying mathematics. I would often have a geometric explanation for why something has to be the way it is in my head, and then translating that into a proof was very, very hard for me. There's a real translation step. I often do not think in a monologue stream of consciousness. My brother, on the other hand, does.
Are you saying that you don't think in language, you think in abstract visual context? Is that how you see the world?
Not always, but almost all of my deep thinking is experienced by me as nonverbal. My brother, on the other hand, seems to think, at least he said so in the discussion, seems to think in an inner monologue of sorts. So to some extent, I did not, because I don't think in an inner monologue, it was hard for me to see how language modeling could lead to problem solving, because that's not how I perceive my own brain to be working. So I was very surprised when it started working. Right, I was pretty wrong about how far you can push language modeling.
I want to make one comment for all the perceived deficiencies that you say in terms of your writing capabilities. I think you're also an amazing writer. I just read your recent piece on the advice to founders. I think that was one of the epic write-ups I've ever read, because it is like very comprehensive. So please, sorry, I had to say that because you write really well too. Regardless of what you think of yourself as a writer, I think you're a great writer too.
Thank you. Well, I like language and I like writing. It's just I did not foresee that language modeling would get us to where we are. Like I think, and because I was so wrong about this, I'm now very careful about making predictions in the sense that I might be right, I might be wrong, but I make a very wide confidence interval around all my statements. Right. So I think we were talking about what's the future of reverse engineering now that we have infinite compute.
Reverse engineering. Creating exploits, breaking into systems, because this required somebody like yours. This is something that, in my humble opinion, required a really good, long time of training and skill and expertise to get to a really elite level. But now that may not be necessarily. I mean, obviously, you can still get better at whatever you do, but even like somebody who's not as skilled as you can get farther along. Like, going back to your initial discussion of the cracking group and the hacking group, right? It is now possible for somebody from the hacking group to get closer to the cracking group, but just by using some of these tools that are out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of things computer security work has always included a lot of perspiration and only a small dash of inspiration, right? And a lot of reverse engineering was always an endurance task. I used to joke, like there's a saying that in some sense the Tour de France, the bicycle race, is a pain Olympics, like whoever endures the most pain wins. And there's something to be said that a lot of reverse engineering and vulnerability development is like it teaches you that if you just apply yourself for long enough and endure enough pain, you can eventually resolve the problem. And there is an argument to be made that modern LLMs kind of commoditize the ability to endure pain because they'll endure the pain for you. You can just tell an LLM, okay, crunch on this for 3 days and do
And
this, right?
there is this sense of infinite pain. It can take infinite pain. Like you can keep prodding it.
You can run out of money for tokens.
Yeah. But like, so if money is not a constraint, you can go down to this infinite level of pain where you can keep prodding it. It'll keep doing it, whatever you tell it to do. It's like a slave of the master. It just, it's always trying to please you.
Yeah. So that's certainly interesting. And certain tasks, like if you think about a non-trivial amount of reverse engineering was always a translation task. Take this machine code and then translate it into human understandable things. Right?
Similar to what BinDiff did in those days. I mean, BinDiff was similar to in the sense it was translate where are the big pathways for me to break in. It simplified somebody to go down the paths.
But BinDiff didn't translate into language, so to speak. It translated into a graph and gave you a picture of the difference. It's actually interesting because BinDiff gave you a picture of the difference, not language. But so the big difference now is that you can largely automatically translate individual pieces of assembly into a high level description of what's going on. And we also have to remember that in the past, reverse engineering is more than just translating assembly to C code. Reverse engineering is about sense making. Like you have, when we had to do reverse engineering of government malware at Zynamics at the time, there was often there was often an epiphany the moment you understand the higher level architecture. So you're working through the details, and as you assemble these details, you have an epiphany. Oh, this is how it works. This is some sort of onion routing. This is some sort of a task scheduler, whatever. And
the thing I remember is there is also this obfuscation code they would add into the binary. So so sometimes once you detect that pattern, this is just wasting cycles. It's just doing unnecessary loops and whatnot, so that you can just discard that away and get back to the thing that really matters.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of the drudge work can be automated now if you have a sufficiently good language model. And I expect the models to continue getting better in almost all realms where you have verifiable rewards. Meaning, as long as you have a way to verify whether the answer is correct or not, improving the model is largely a matter of spending compute. Because if you look at what's happening in the LLM world, we ran out of human-generated data a while ago, and almost all the improvement now is variations of reinforcement learning on tasks where you have a verifiable outcome. And as long as we keep spending compute, there's no reason to assume that the models won't keep improving on these verifiable tasks to some extent.
So if that is what is the future? What is the future of vulnerability research? There is this piece that came out, Thomas Dullien, he said vulnerability research is cooked. And his thesis was based on what Anthropic did. The Anthropic researchers basically went to the models and say, hey, I'm going to capture the flag competition. Help me find these vulnerabilities, so that I can win this competition. And once it gave you a list of vulnerabilities, hey, I just got an inbound of all these vulnerabilities. Which ones of these are accurate? Like the model just told you, here are the 10 you should really go after. Somebody like who's like an elite researcher like you, what do you think is the future of vulnerability research in the coming years?
Yeah, it's hard to know, right? I mean, the demand for vulnerabilities will remain there. Like governments will continue. Yeah. The governments will want vulnerabilities, continue paying for vulnerabilities, because the service they provide, like the product they provide to the governments, is very valuable to the governments, and they will want to continue having them. Now, the more interesting question is, how many fish are there in the sea? How many fish remain once the LLM is through? And those are two unknowables at the moment. The defenders will have access to the most powerful LLMs to find and fix bugs eventually. The offensive people will have access to the most powerful LLMs to find bugs to exploit. there is some equilibrium that will be reached where, I mean, everybody talks about the vuln apocalypse right now, but the reality is this is a one-time shock. Like when fuzzing became a thing, out of a sudden everybody could start fuzzing and there were many bugs to be found. And then the utility of fuzzing decreased because everybody was doing it. So we will see something similar. We have a one-time shock now where there's lots of vulnerabilities. They will largely get fixed. There's a certain rate at which new vulnerabilities are introduced by either manual coding or vibe coding. We don't quite know where this will leave us. Like, will there be sufficient vulnerabilities left?
Do you think there is going to be a new class of vulnerabilities that will come up through this experimentation that will happen over the next year or two? Because historically, my sense is most of the exploitation was through a single vulnerability. You would try to figure out a remote code exploit, break into the system, and then go from there. But my sense now is that you can now chain a lot of these vulnerabilities, which was done before, but now it is much more easier to chain vulnerabilities. So the chaining of these vulnerabilities would become much more exponential in the coming years. Do you see? So my question is, one is the chaining aspect. Second is like new classes of vulnerabilities that we are not even aware of.
Yeah, so I think that chaining has been a reality for 6, 7, 8 years now. Like
not at scale, right? I mean, it was not at the level. I mean, humans would have to like figure out, okay, I can use this and this and this, and then
so humans would have to do the chaining, and some of that chaining can be automated now, which is interesting, right? Because it might help you build better chains. Clearly, the thing I find somewhat fascinating about LLMs, though, is you run the same LLM on the same code base 3 times, you get different sets of bugs. Right?
You mean with the same prompt or with a different prompt?
Same prompt. It's just randomized. Like there's randomized. Like LLMs are inherently randomized, right? So it's really hard to tell where this will land. What has gotten dramatically cheaper is rewriting things in Rust. I mean, the fact that Anthropic rewrote bun in Rust by spending like $170,000 in tokens, the ability to rewrite legacy C++ code bases in memory-safe languages has definitely changed. Mm. So there might be a lot of rewriting that will happen. But I'm doing a lot of vibe coding, and models have strange failure modes. They're not human intelligences. They are strange creatures. They're not like they're big matrix multiplications, but the way they function in the end is very different from how you would think a human would function. And they have very surprising weaknesses, because we have like something like Fable will crush many math Olympiad problems. It'll fail to read a clock reliably. The models are very, very good at reading code sequentially now. I don't find them very good at doing reasoning about multi-threaded issues. And if they're bad at reasoning about multi-threaded issues, they'll also be bad at writing multi-threaded code. So it's really unclear to me where the equilibrium will land in terms of how many bugs there are, how difficult they are to find. We shall see. Right? It's a brave new world in some sense.
Thomas, let's switch to your latest work, which is Optimize. And curious what is going there. You've done all these different things. You've been, from playing games to hacking games to copy protection to like BinDiff to all the work that you have done in vulnerability research, and now you're doing Optimize. There are two questions I have. One is,
so Optimize was done 4 years ago. So I did Optimize from 2019 to 2021.
So I want to get your thoughts on Optimize, and as I said in the interview, you're a really great writer. One of your recent pieces, I think it should just be hanged in lower. Like that is like an epic piece of writing. It's very comprehensive. I don't know why you wrote it. I want to get your thoughts on both Optimize and like advice for young entrepreneurs and young researchers on how to think about this world that is coming our way in the next 4 to 5 years. Because my assumption is I talk to you in 2 years, the world that we live in will be completely different than what we're experiencing today. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, Optimize, I got tired of security in around 2017, 18-ish. And I wanted to do something that was technically as interesting, but had fewer complications, because security in the end is a zero-sum game. You're always defending something or attacking something against somebody. It's always about human conflict. I got really tired about because of that. I wanted to do something which has like a positive effect on the world. And at the time, GPUs weren't really a thing and AI wasn't really a thing. So CPU code optimization was actually a very low-hanging fruit to have a positive impact, where you could do technical work and then save power and earn money and save energy. Yeah. So my co-founder Sean and me started a company that then did fleet-wide profiling, where if you have 1,000 machines, you can install the software and it measures where are all the CPU cycles going. That was capability that existed inside Google for some programming languages, but we were the first to use eBPF in the Linux kernel to make it widely available to everybody. And that was very well received. And we then, in a complicated set of events, got acquired by Elastic. And Elastic ultimately open sourced the relevant code, which is now part of OpenTelemetry profiling. So if you're the OpenTelemetry profiling agent that you can just install on your machines, that'll tell you 20 times per second what's the stack trace that's currently executing, like through a whole bunch of programming languages, like from the Linux kernel through user space C into Python. That's the formal optimized code, and I'm kind of proud of that because it is in wide use and saves CPU cycles everywhere.
I'm curious, you said you lost interest in security because of all the work that was happening in 2017. Has your interest rejuvenated after the things that you've seen in AI?
So, somewhat. Certainly, security was very stagnant in 2018. Like, it hadn't changed a lot in 18, 19 years. Computing as a whole is changing very drastically. And when Optimize got started, CPU waste was the primary motivator. If you look at where energy consumption and compute is going, it's all going into matrix multiplications in GPUs now, right? So very clearly, I have a great interest in efficient inference now, or efficient training, efficiency in the internals of AI, because that's where all the compute is going. And I have a great interest in how AI is restructuring all of software engineering, including security.
Yeah.
So in some sense, security is exciting again, because something has moved for the first time in more than a decade. So I personally find the pace and change that we currently see from the LLM side to be really quite exciting. I don't think I've been as interested in the changes in tech as I am now in a while. So,
one thing that would be cool for you to do is to build a chip of your own, like build your own inference chip. So that would be the most epic contribution to mankind. Last question for you, Thomas. What advice do you have for founders and researchers for the next 5 years?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I mean, any advice is always overfit to the extent that it's based on the past, and the future is a very different country. I think one of the things to take away, like, people look at LLMs and are like, oh no, we're obsolete as software engineers or something like this. I think that's the wrong lens to look at this. The right lens to look at this is what is now possible for me, in the sense that what's the maximum ambitious project that I can tackle using these helpers, because they are amazingly powerful machines in some sense. Like, if you think of the advent of the steam engine, you were very limited what you could do alone prior to the steam engine. And once you have a steam engine like a source of energy, there's lots of things you can all of a sudden do that weren't possible beforehand. And I think LLMs are for sure a similarly important development as the internet. They might possibly be as important as the steam engine or the mechanization of industry. So the thing to think about is always, what can I achieve with the tools that are now available to me? Paul Graham has something about what's possible today that wasn't possible 3 years ago is usually a good way of ideating business ideas. And that's not wrong, right? Because a lot of things are possible now that weren't possible 3 years ago, and those will be interesting. I think another piece of advice is personalized tutoring in any subject you're interested in was historically not available. And I've always been like, there's an argument to be made that I really my prime motivator for anything I've done in life is curiosity and the joy of learning. Very few things give me joy, like having understood something that I didn't understand previously. And for me, having a sort of personalized tutor that isn't always right, but sometimes tries to tell me bullshit.
Well, that is only if you know if it is bullshit. If you're not trained in that area, you might accept it as like really good.
Well,
but if you know the domain pretty well, then you can say, "Oh, this is bullshit."
Yeah, but it's good exercise. Like talking through a complicated topic with an LLM and catching the LLM and making errors usually is an indicator that you're starting to understand the topic well. So my advice is pick things you want to learn and make the best use of the personalized tutoring that the LLMs can give you to learn the topic as best as you can. Because the fact that we still have to correct LLMs quite often, even the frontier LLMs on domain-specific topics, like I think we're a long way away from complete obsolescence of the human input. I think a human with a tool will outperform just the tool for the foreseeable future. So try to be that human with a tool.
Awesome. Well, that's a good way to end this interview. Thomas, super grateful for you to coming on this pod. This was an amazing interview. Looking forward to what you do next, and hopefully you build that next generation inference chip as well.
I probably won't, but I'll do something else.